Good afternoon. I call this meeting to order. This is the 7th meeting of the Task Force for reviewing the connectivity and technology needs of precision agriculture in the United States. Welcome to our task force members for joining us today virtually, and welcome to everyone who is watching live at fcc.gov/live. I'm Elizabeth Kuttner, the Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the task force, joined by Stacey Ferraro, who is also a Deputy DFO. We'll be filling in for Jesse, who is on leave this week. So without further ado, let's proceed to the roll call. Teddy Bekele, Chair, Land O'Lakes.
Present.
Catherine Moyer, Vice Chair, Pioneer Communications.
I am also here.
Dr. Michael Adelane, South Dakota State University.
Here.
Seth Arndorfer, Dakota Carrier Network.
Here.
The Honorable Dale Artho, Deaf Smith County, Texas.
Present.
Andy Bader, Fifth State Growers, LLC.
Hello, I'm here.
Peter Brent, New Vision Farms.
I'm present.
Chris Chin, Missouri Department of Agriculture. Chris, are you on? Okay. Anthony Dillard, Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma.
Here.
Michael Gomes, Topcon Agriculture.
I'm here.
Dan Leibfried, John Deere.
Here.
Mike McCormick, Mississippi Farm Bureau.
Here.
Jeff Pettit, National Association of Tower Erectors.
Present.
Steve Vale, Nine Star Connect. Steve? No, Steve. And is David Goldman from SpaceX on? I think he had a conflict, so I just wanted to check. And then lastly, from the Department of Agriculture, Chris McLean, are you on?
I am here. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you all. It looks like we do have a quorum. So with that, I will hand it over to the task force chair, Teddy Bekele. Teddy?
Elizabeth, thank you so much, and good afternoon, and welcome to everyone for attending this task force meeting. Very excited to have everyone here and get the latest updates on the progress we've all made in kind of getting us closer to the end of the year and the report that we have to generate. I'm also aware that a lot of different teams have had numerous meetings since the last time we met, and that's very exciting to see and encouraging. I've seen several updates from the teams as well in those working groups, which I think that has been a really, really good thing. You know, from this standpoint, one of the reasons we're having the meeting today, typically we would have only had 3, maybe 4 meetings in the year, is just a little bit of a lessons learned from last year. As we get closer to the time in which we have to submit our final report, it was better for us to get together and discuss not only progress, maybe even some of the topics, and if they need to be debated further by the members of the task force. So we've set up this meeting, which is about 120 minutes or 2 hours. If we don't have to go that long, that's okay. We do have another meeting set up in September as well to touch base and do a very similar thing, and one in October, and then our final meeting will be in November. So this was the ability for us to get together to debate some of the findings, some of the recommendations that are coming up from the working groups, and make sure we're totally aligned on what we want to present. So today will be more of an update, and the following meetings will also be more updates than anything else. But I still look forward to a good, robust discussion. And at this meeting, towards the latter part of it or towards the end of it, we'll also lay out some expectations on what we will see here in the next couple of weeks and months to come. So that's it from my side. Catherine, I don't know if there's a few things you want to comment on.
No, not really, Teddy. I second everything that you've said, and knowing what our working group, the working group that I'm participating on, has been doing over the last several months, I think that this update could come at a better time, and I look forward to the discussion.
Okay, perfect. So, as far as the agenda for today, what we'll do really is we'll cover a little bit on the executive summary. I think some of you have seen that. Elizabeth sent it out in the pre-read for today. I'll give you an update on where we are. Not too much has changed since the last time we've met. I've gotten several feedback from different task force members, different members on the working groups. Most things were minor, so those were incorporated if it made sense. Some of the more, the bigger things, left them open as an open item that we could discuss on the call today. So we'll just do a quick review of the executive summary, and then after the executive summary is done, we'll go into the updates of the working groups, so the chairs and potentially the vice chairs of the working groups can give us an update on if, and I know two of them, there was documents submitted and those were also sent out in the pre-read. So if there's anybody has questions, comments, concerns, things to think about, that will be the opportunity to have that as the chairs review those findings. For the ones that weren't submitted, that's totally okay. It wasn't an expectation to have anything ready today, but there will be an expectation here in the next couple of weeks. But at least at a high level, you can give us an update on what the working groups have been doing, the discussions that are taking place, and some of the maybe outliers that have come up since the preliminary reports were submitted last year and the beginning part of this year. So with that, we'll talk a little bit about next steps, again, like what to expect in the next couple of weeks, and then we will adjourn the meeting. In that, any questions, comments from anyone as far as what we'll be doing here in the next few minutes and an hour or so? And again, if you have any comments, you could just use the hand raise button in the Teams application, and I'll be happy to call on you.
Hey, Teddy, I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry. I was trying to get it, but this is Dan Leipfried with John Deere. I just wanted to ask, during the executive summary discussion that we're about to have, do we want to be highlighting or flagging any additions or adjustments to the actual recommendations that are built into the reports that we'll review later? I suspect that that's the protocol, but I just wanted to make sure so we don't get into a loop.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Dan. Absolutely. So I would say you can highlight it when we get to a specific spot and say this may be where we have an additional recommendation or we made a modification to an existing one that's there today. And obviously, you'll be submitting them to myself and Catherine here over the next couple of days, and then we'll make sure to incorporate it in the main document.
Perfect. Thanks.
Good clarifying question. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so let me go ahead and share the document and we can get right in. Okay, is everyone able to see the document? Can't see anybody, so it's hard for me. I'm guessing yes.
Yes, we can, Teddy.
Okay, perfect.
Yes, sir, we can.
There's a special way to share where you can see everybody. I'm still fumbling around with that part. So anyway, so this is the executive summary, and the way it's sort of laid out, you have the executive summary, which is kind of just the opening comments, and then there's the various recommendations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and since the last time we talked, one of them has been broken out into 2, so now there's 6, and then there's a conclusion at the end. Like I said, there were comments that were put in as far as, words used here, language, some commas and all that has been incorporated in. And there's a few other things that were either suggested last time and are in the works, or are things that, I'll highlight here today. So those comments that have not been incorporated or still up for discussion there's a comment here, and you can see that sort of on the right-hand side. So the introduction part has been, if you remember last time, it was just one paragraph or so. So it's been expanded to talk a little bit about what this work, this Precision Ag Connectivity Task Force is all about, talk a little bit about the problem at hand, and then gets into a little bit of what are some of the key recommendations that are coming together, and those recommendations being in together. One of the comments that were included before was the the ability to include some statistics in some of this initial narrative. Again, we're working on those statistics, making sure that it's a statistic that's relevant to this task force. So most likely that will be incorporated, but we don't have those statistics in place yet. Another piece in the opening statement or in the opening section of this executive summary was to ensure that we've asked if we could get some comments or some quotes from the FCC and the USDA. I believe we'll be able to get those. So as soon as those are put in, they'll be incorporated most likely here in the closing part of the this first section, or throughout the document, and maybe even in the conclusion. So working on to make sure that that gets incorporated as well. Any questions or comments on this first part of the document? And Catherine, you'll have to help me here if there's a hand up. Again, I'm not able to see those. So
Sure, Dr. Adelaide's hands up.
okay, go ahead, Dr. Adelaide.
Teddy, I just wondered, as I read through this, there will be reports submitted by the working groups that add substance to the recommendations that are in here. And so I wondered if possibly the last paragraph before the first point, the following notes provide a summary. If some words could be added to that says the working group full report will be provided in appendix or wherever, but some kind of that leads the reader to know that this is the short list and that there's more detail and substance in other documents.
Yep, it's a good suggestion. Yeah, to let them know there's a lot more details and more explanation and more info in the latter part of the document. So
thank you.
Okay, it's a good suggestion. Any other hands up?
There aren't any other hands up.
Okay. So we get into the recommendations, improve federal broadband maps and consistently validate user experience. This is the same as it was before. There's 4 different recommendations in this. I believe 3 come out of one working group and 1 comes from a different working group. So that has not been changed. Maybe some of the language has been slightly updated, but hopefully you had a chance to look through this. Any questions, comments on this one?
Dan Levfried raised his hand. And so did Andy Bader.
And again, this could be a little circular relative to the working group reports, but Dr. Adeline, I'd ask you to maybe take a look at the end of our recommendations. We had at least some insights and recommendations around data mapping, even though it's outside of our scope. One of them being around census information and surveys. So it just may be worth it as we go through the working group reports to look at that and see if there's value in elevating any of those pieces as sub-elements of the mapping work that we've laid out here. I'm not suggesting it has to be, I just wanted to at least raise it for awareness.
Thank you, Dan.
Can I jump in, Teddy? A question, this is perhaps a little broader than just this particular section, although this section is what brought it to mind. Do we, as a sanctioned, or that's probably the wrong word, as an official task force with the Federal Communications Commission, have an opportunity to officially send some of these recommendations off to another task force with the Federal Communications Commission? And I'm thinking of the folks that are working on broadband mapping to, more pointedly ask for some of these things to happen under their watch.
Okay, so yeah, knowing that there's another task force that's working on this, can we send some of the recommendations over to that group? That's your question or point, right?
Correct.
Yeah, I believe that's a possibility. One of the things we can do, Andy, is as we finalize this, maybe we can pull out the ones that kind of fall in that category, and we could even have a section at the end, maybe not part of the conclusion, but maybe something separate that calls that out. I know we've done it in the other working groups as well.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
And Michael Gomes has his hand up.
Hi,
Hey,
Mike.
Teddy. Hey, thanks. I wasn't part of this particular working group or this particular subject matter, but I guess one of the things that hit me was because this is going to the FCC, and the FCC are the guys that they require they get the requirements from the providers. It seemed to me that there was a bit of a check back mechanism. We talked specifically about the idea of the crowdsourced data, the crowdsourcing data about the validation and the ground test mechanisms, but we never brought it all the way back to a requirement or some level of a check back for the people that had won the ability to serve those areas. And I just wasn't sure if that was appropriate or if that was something that the committee had looked at, because it fit in my mind, but I also am very far from the subject matter.
Yeah, I think there'll be more, probably section 1D, I think is more of that. Dr. Adeline, maybe you can speak to a little bit more about the verification process, or at least the recommendation, not the process.
So we were really looking at validation that was separate, independent of any of the FCC processes. And so that's why we looked at crowdsourcing and ground truthing, where the ground truthing would be a professional approach and crowdsourcing would be just collecting data from users. Michael, I understand your question. I just don't know if that's part of our wheelhouse.
I could see that you couldn't figure out if it was appropriate or not, and that's why I thought at least to bring it up and ask, just because I'm a neophyte, I'm on the ag side and I don't understand very much about this process. That's why I thought I'd ask. Okay.
Sandy, I'm gonna jump in here. This is exactly why I was wondering if we could send these sections off to the other FCC task force who might elect to incorporate some of these recommendations in their more official work.
Okay.
Cool. Thanks.
So that's a good call out, Andy. I mean, that's something we can do to include that as well. Okay. One thing I failed to mention at the beginning. So we're still at from a formatting perspective, it's still pretty much just a base Word document, kind of open it up and wrote. And you see some of the sections here bolded. When the final gets put together, most likely won't look like this, but the goal was to get the executive summary plus the 4 reports together. And then the goal is at that point, we would bring it all together so we had consistent formatting, consistent way to highlight things, and have more of a common look and feel and a standard for all of that. So at the moment, it's just more the raw information that's here. So just know that this will be part of the work in September, and the latter half of September is to bring all that together and have a consistent document. So that's just something I meant to mention earlier and I didn't. Okay, if there are no more hands up, we'll move on to the second one, which is the increase incentives to build out a robust infrastructure. Again, no big changes. Actually, there were no changes at all in this section from the last time this was reviewed together with the task force. I believe this is the area, maybe Dan, where there are some additional things that may be coming, but But again, no changes from the last time at the moment.
Yeah, the area I'm looking for is more around the connectivity speeds. That's the most relevant adjustment that I think we want to make a suggestion around.
Got it. Okay. That'll be the next one. Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Any questions or any hands up on the specific one? Okay. Moving to the third one, was it enhance the high-speed standards to meet technology needs in agriculture? Yes, this was probably the one where there's some recommendations, Dan, on this piece, I believe.
Yeah, and in our updated document, we're at the point where we're recommending for fixed and wired to be 100, 100, both up and down, and for wireless to be 120. 100 down, 20 up, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, is already kind of lined up with the infrastructure bills that are in the process right now. So just reinforcing the infrastructure bill that just came out and ensuring that we go and execute against it.
Okay.
So we'll have to think of the exact language, but I wanted to at least kind of get that on the table.
Perfect. Yep. So that'll be one that we either we'll bring into this, so we'll enhance one of the subsections, so subpoints in here, or create another one if that makes more sense.
You bet.
Other questions or comments on this piece?
So Teddy, this is Mike Adeline. With that recommendation, I've certainly heard in talking to the individuals that have looked, that I've shared this with, they talked about having 100, 100. But they also heard about some reluctancy that really in the field that might not be necessary. So I don't know how you craft, certainly at the home place where you aggregate data. And if you were talking about, all right, let me just say, if you're talking about a township where you have, all the sections and you have a combine in each section, you need significant connectivity. So I don't know how to craft to not knock anybody out.
Mm-hmm.
That could supply some basics where, maybe the best we can do is less than 25.3, but it still offers something. And yet where we have a significant need and there's the capability that we go 100, 100. So Daniel, I'm not sure what to do.
Yeah, maybe just to clarify, Dr. Adeline, we're talking about where there's wired infrastructure, things like fiber. That's where you would want 100, 100. Mobile and or terrestrial, we believe that the new standard should be aiming towards, and again, I know it's hard to judge what aiming towards means, but aiming towards 100 down and 20 up, not 100, 100 on mobile type of applications. So we do have, and again, I believe based upon everything I've read, that's in line with what the infrastructure bill called for as well.
Super. Thank you.
You bet.
I think, Dan, the infrastructure bill is sitting at 100 down and 20 up, regardless of whether fixed or wireless, and didn't take into account that 100, 100 speed.
Okay, I'll have to review that. I thought it was right in line, but again, so many things change. I can't keep up with every law.
Yeah. And I think, your message earlier, or your explanation earlier, the scalability piece, I think, is ultimately the most important, which I know is what the conversation we've had in our working group.
Yep. Does that help, Dr. Adeline? That we're not trying to look at it as one size fits all and ultimately end up getting nothing out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Daniel, I agree with you. Right now at the university, we're talking 500 gig, right? We just got to 100. We were at 10. You got to keep pushing forward. So I absolutely agree.
And Michael Gomes raised his hand.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Dan. I think the 100 is the idea of something nearly symmetrical in the fixed where you can, and then the wireless accommodating, something closer to a 5+ is exactly the right way to be playing it. And so I think it fits well, and it fits well the infrastructure, at least the stuff that I've read as well. And so that we got a better chance of getting it through, which is good. So I just mostly positive affirmation and appreciate the thoughts.
Thanks, Michael.
And Seth raised his hand.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe it ties back into that these metrics aren't maybe the baseline for what is accepted in on the wireless side, but if there are programs, government programs that are going to fund that, the weighting goes towards future-proof technologies that are symmetrical in nature, and then tie it into these bandwidth parameters.
Okay, good comments and questions there. Wrote down most of them. So moving on to the next section is around improving the collaboration between federal agencies and removing some of the regulatory impediments. There were several points here. And I know there was recently even some announcements of the FCC, USDA, and NTIA kind of coming together on collaboration here. So it's good to see some of the movement there. I think that doesn't really change the recommendations we bring forward. We might be able to call that out deeper into the document, but again, I think there were some language changes here, specifically in 4C.2. This one was written a bit differently, where it originally sounded like, it could potentially be interpreted in a way where multiple sources of funding were going to be used for the same project, and there could be some confusion there. Whereas the idea was, could you use funding from different sources if there's not enough to complete the job in a specific area? So language there was updated to be able to reflect more of the intent. But other than that, there weren't any big changes to this section either. Okay. Going into number 5, increase digital access to education and training for individuals engaged in farming. Again, there was a few comments here and there on this one. There weren't any substantial changes to the recommendation, so pretty much kept the same, although there were a few modifications here and there. So again, that one speaks for itself. I'm not hearing anything else. Going into the last section, it was other key considerations, and it really said other key considerations because the two were substantially different from one another. One was around cybersecurity, and then the other one was around interoperability. There was a comment here, and this was a bigger one, around, in addition to cybersecurity and cyber vulnerabilities, should we also include something around privacy, especially for farmers? That's a potential to add it as a C or one of the 3 under the other key considerations, but left it open at the moment to see what the working group was going to come back with as far as the details. And depending on how that recommendation is crafted, certainly happy to include another recommendation around privacy. But at the moment, haven't gotten that back, and as soon as that comes back, this will get updated with that recommendation. Okay.
Okay, Michael Gomes.
Michael, go ahead.
Hey, Teddy, I just had a quick one on, we always talk about interoperability like it's a single thing. And kind of the body of work where it's headed today is there's interoperability kind of on board or in tractor implement, and then kind of off board. And so I wasn't sure if we wanted to get to that level of detail, right? But whenever they talk about a standard of interoperability, they talk about it like it's one thing. And I think there's, you begin to dive into a complex issue, and I wasn't sure if we wanted to put something in there about elements of that, at least open for discussion to the group.
Yeah, good comment, Mike. So the reason why it's under key considerations, right? Other key considerations, both this one and the cybersecurity, both of them are really, really big areas. And if you think about privacy, yet another big one, right? So from this task force perspective, I think it's important to call out that these are things that need to be addressed. And maybe to the point that Andy made earlier, we could have it somewhere where it's like we can direct that to be taken care of somewhere else, or somebody should look at this. Because to your point, I think if we get into what does it mean and what are we recommending, I mean, we could have a whole nother task force just focused on interoperability. So that was the thought process. But I'm happy to, if we need to be more specific, we certainly can.
My thinking was just if we did it, the idea is so that then the idea that I don't want anything to stop because we don't have interoperability, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's the idea that recognizing that there is a level of onboard and offboard, there's a level of complexity below that, right? And so I would hate to see anybody say, well, we don't need to adopt it because we don't have interoperability, when the answer is but we're building elements of those things forward.
Okay. I get what you're saying. Okay. So it's actually how we craft this recommendation.
Right.
And how we make it sound. Yep.
See, Dan's going to have something good to say.
I'm actually just echoing your comment. I think if we are going to look to pass this off to whether it's the next layer of the task force that we're on or other groups, providing a little bit of clarity as to the components of it without answering the question will only help them to scope the work to be able to think through it more clearly quickly. So I agree with you, Michael.
Okay.
And Dr. Adelaide has a question as well, or a comment.
So I'm agreeing with Michael, and I'm thinking from a dissertation thesis approach. Okay, when you get to the conclusions, in that you always state something looking forward. What didn't we answer? And whether it's a handoff to this rechartered group or another group, I think it's important in your conclusion to make a statement about that and maybe a couple of things that they may consider going forward.
Okay. Those are good suggestions.
Yeah, Teddy, it could be as simple as right after established, recognizing onboard and offboard as components or something. You know what I mean? It could be something very simple. I'm not trying to jam this thing up for sure.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's exactly what this is for, is to throw this up and then make adjustments and see if it reads the way we all agree and the way it should read. And then if there are is there any other comments or hands up, Catherine?
Nope, there are no other hands up.
Okay. So moving on to the conclusion, I know we probably want this to be a little bit more robust and maybe even action-packed as far as next steps. Left this one waiting till everything else came back together. We made some updates to the recommendations, and once it's all in there and we get to closer to a final draft, then we can look to beef this up with sort of more like forward-looking, sort of a call to action. That's what I was looking for. Call to action type of conclusion. So for the moment, just think of this as a placeholder so everything else comes together, and then we'll make sure this gets updated. Okay, so any other questions, comments on the executive summary?
I don't see any other hands, Teddy.
All right. Okay, come back now. I can see everything. So the next step is really to go through sort of just the updates from the working groups. So maybe we'll start with the data mapping. So Dr. Adeline, I'll turn it over to you for an update on the working group.
Okay, thanks, Teddy. Just two quick things, because these recommendations weren't originally in our presentation back in October. The first one, and in the document that I provided, I made the text in blue so you can see that that wording has changed since our last one. But we really feel, after significant discussion, and then we had some discussion with some subject matter people, that the ability to create a negative space, unserved, underserved map is certainly possible. And we think it's quite important that it be done as quickly as possible, and not to wait until other processes are in place. We believe it can be done almost immediately, and it would be really important to be able to have agriculturalists see, we don't have connectivity there yet. And so we thought that was a pretty straightforward process. And as connectivity comes online and as things get built out, that map would be continually refreshed. So we thought that was extremely important. And we believe the know-how, the technology is out there to make this happen. So that was number one that was different than the October presentation. The second thing is, and there was a significant amount of discussion on this, it was initially felt that any maps should be hosted strictly by the FCC. And we had some dialogue, and for agriculturalists, for the people that we want to serve with this, their interaction is with the USDA. It's not with the FCC. And so we wanted to provide an area of vehicle. In the Agricultural Research Service, many of the agriculturalists, the farmers, ranchers, do go to that site quite often. And having maps that they can look at there that shows them who the provider is, what kind of connectivity, if there is any, and maybe information on what could be built out. Now, what we're not talking about is duplicating, right? If the FCC and the USDA can pull each other's data, because as we talked about, we want interoperability among these data sets. It wouldn't be hard for them to create a map that shows currently in your area, this is what we have for, or what we believe for connectivity. But hosting on a site that the farmers and ranchers are used to going to, we felt was very important and would be much more effective than saying, well, you need to go to the FCC site, such, in order to find out in your area where there's connectivity, okay? So those were really the two that are new, different from what we did in October. The others are just updates to questions that the task force had previously, and we provided some rounding out of information related to our previous recommendations. So, without going into a lot of significant detail, basically that's it, Teddy.
Perfect. Thank you, Dr. Adeline. Any questions to Dr. Adeline and for this working group, for anybody else on the task force? Dan?
Yeah, Dr. Adeline, again, I'll just reference at the end of our current draft, we have a data gathering and mapping section in the recommendations, not suggesting that it was our group's input area. It was definitely yours. Two areas maybe just to note. The USDA should gather data on the level of connectivity to farmhouses and ag lands via the Census of Agriculture survey and make that data publicly available. The USDA should commence this work in 2022 during their next survey period. So there was a note that just in general, with that opportunity of USDA doing a Census of Agriculture next year, getting the right question set in, that might be worthwhile in order to keep the input elements coming in. So take that as input, not an actual suggestion that you have to take. And then the other one is Precision Agricultural Connectivity Survey. The appropriate government agency should be tasked with performing a biannual survey to farmers, service providers, and technologists to determine the broadband performance standards required to support the industry. This is a little bit of a reflection of the challenge that we had as a working group in actually executing a survey due to the Paperwork Reduction Act in a meaningful database way. That, you know, if the government starts to set up the right protocols to do that on an ongoing basis, we can actually see whether or not the gap is getting closed in a data-based way rather than assuming it's getting closed because we hoped it would. So those would be the two things that I would note. There's a few other ones in there, but just wanted to kind of tie the bow on that.
Thanks, Daniel. Those are excellent. I appreciate it. And on the Census of Agriculture, we've had that discussion. So you're right in line, and that, absolutely. And we talked about, well, how do we measure how far we've gone? So those are excellent too. So we'll work in that area. Thank you.
You bet. And then in general, Teddy and Dr. Adeline and Catherine, I would also say, you know, now that it's been heard, I will likely work with the working group to remove elements that were somewhat outside of the scope of our document, just in order to ensure that we don't muddy the water. But at least it's been voiced in the public forum.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. Other questions or comments?
Teddy, this is Heather. Can you hear me now?
Yep, Heather, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, good. Thank you. We're actually mobile, but question, as I read the data mapping addition to it, refers to FCC considering to invest in the Geological Survey 3-DEF program. Specifically, what would that investment look like to help with completion of the, I understand it to be more LiDAR survey for more accurate 3D rendering to understand, you know, potential constraints for broadcast signal and things. But how would we see that investment taking place?
So we had quite a bit of discussion on it, and with the experts that we have in the working group, the 3-DEF group would tell us where the signal can be blocked. So if a provider's trying to get to a locale, they would know the elevation and other terrain issues that might cause problems. And it would also inform the producer about whether he can get connectivity or he or she can get connectivity in that area because of the particular terrain. And the 3-DEF group is working significantly to map the whole United States and would cover agricultural land. And it would be easy to import that, as we understand it, to import that data in order for a provider to know what things he's going to run into in order to get connectivity, as well as the producer knowing that. That help, Heather?
It does. I mean, I understand the purpose of it. My question was more specifically related to the phrase that the FCC should invest in it. So I think it may have been the second or third point.
Okay.
So rather than just work from their data and build that in and make it as useful as possible, where do we see that money coming from? Is it getting diverted from another pool? And what level? Do we have some insight into what that might look like if they perceive this? Meaning the USGS perceives they have a current shortfall.
So my understanding is the 3-DEF program is not fully funded, and where they've had successes where states have been willing to put in some dollars, but in some areas that's not going to be possible. So it would be helpful, I think, to and our working group thought, to the FCC to have this information, and working with the USDA or USGS to help fund some of these locations would be appropriate. They do have a total figure for the whole project, but again, there are states that are going to fund it, so they don't have a narrow number specifically for what may be the FCC proportion. That makes sense, Heather?
Yes, it does. I'm sorry. I'm laughing at the robotic voice telling me I'm no longer muted now, 2 minutes later.
Better late than never.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the data mapping working group? Dr. Adeline, one more mechanical question. So do you feel the report's in the shape where it's getting closer to the final, or there's still a lot of discussions and modifications still to occur?
No, Teddy, we're very close to being finished. There's only maybe a few tweaks based on the input that I got today. So
Okay.
otherwise, we'll be in very good shape to hit. We're intending to hit that September deadline. Or
got it. Okay. So
September window.
Got it. So we start merging it into a common document with common format. We can start to do that knowing that there's maybe a few modifications here and there.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that.
You bet.
All right, if there's no other questions or comments for this working group, we will move on to the connectivity demand working group. And Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
You bet, Teddy. If helpful, go ahead and pull up our report draft that we had submitted as well. So over the course of time since our last task force meeting, I would say we've iterated the report since our last submission last fall to a great extent, adding in the pieces that we've talked about around sustainability, equity, and closing the digital divide, et cetera, more of a narrative element. So I wouldn't call it macro changes to the structure or anything like that, but to just kind of build out the proof points of why. We have refined our recommendations, and as I noted earlier, in particular, the recommendation around speed standards for both fixed or wired at 100, and for wireless or terrestrial at 100/20, and that's now incorporated into our recommendations. And as stated earlier, I'd recommend that we do include that element somehow in the executive summary. And the team's got a little bit of cleanup to do over the course of the next month, but we're in a position, I believe we're on a path to be in a position prior to next month's 2-hour meeting to submit at least our final report, unless there's significant comments from the team today relative to the draft that they're seeing. So we should be on track as well, Teddy, I would say.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Take this down. I'll bring it back up if needed. So from the rest of the task force, this was also one of the documents that was shared yesterday. If you had a chance to read through it, any questions or comments for Dan and the rest of the team? Okay, not seeing any hands go up. Obviously,
maybe just one other point. Sorry to interrupt you, Teddy.
Yeah.
And as I stated earlier, for those that overlap, for those recommendations or areas that overlap groups, we'll take that out prior to the final submission as well.
Okay, that's perfect. And that's what I was going to say, Dan. Is it sounds like the team is in a good spot. So we'll work with you and the rest of the team to first of all update the executive summary so it's reflective of the recommendations coming from the working group, and then two, as you said, as you remove some of the sections that are more recommendations for the other working groups, we'll start to incorporate it into to the larger document, right? So we can start that work ahead of time. That way gives us a little bit of a leg up before September. So, but good progress. Any other last minute questions or comments for this working group? Okay. Not seeing any hands up, so we'll move on to the next one, which is the adoption and precision agriculture and availability of high quality jobs. Mike McCormick, I believe I saw you on earlier. Would you like to give us an update on where the working group is today?
Teddy, we feel like we were pretty well out in front on this. Don't have a lot to report since our last update. We've got just some wordsmithing that's been done. No big changes. We still got the one thing that we're working on, which is metrics. that we need to add to our report, and that'll pretty much tie it up. But we were working with the mapping group to make sure we didn't overlap that. But I've got Michael Gomes on with me. He's been helping Julie put that report together, which is almost through. I suspect in the next week or a little more, we'll turn ours in. So, Mike, you wanna give an update on something I might have missed?
I think you covered it pretty well. We're very much in line with both Dr. Adeline's group on the mapping, as well as Dan's group on those pieces. And so we believe that, what we've got or what we'll provide in the next week or two will be very consistent with what you've seen from us. And so we're comfortable with the idea that you begin moving forward on it. And so we should have something to you in the next couple of weeks, so that way at our next meeting in the next month, we should be in great shape.
Okay. That's really good to hear. And like I said, you said wordsmithing and then the one open item, but other than that, most of it is kind of where we were before, right? So we can start to incorporate some of that. And obviously maybe some of the things that go into the other working groups have been modified or put in line with the rest.
Correct.
Right.
When we get the last part in, which is the metrics parts that we're using, and we wanted to make sure that was right. All of the rest of it is exactly where we've been before, besides some little wordsmithing, Julie changing some words back and forth here and there to make it read better.
Okay, perfect. So all we'll do is as that report comes in, we'll start to incorporate it into a major document, but we'll also make sure that we'll work with you, Mike, both Mike McCormick, Mike Gomes, and Julie, to make sure that like the executive summary also reflects the major recommendations coming from your working group, and that the working group feels like the things they're recommending forward are reflected in that executive summary, right? And then nothing is left.
Right.
Obviously, a lot of the details will be in the document.
Right. We reviewed that executive summary, the draft one, and that was in a very, very tight alignment with our group and our thinking. And so it flew through. And so that's where we believe that, what we're doing is very consistent. So I don't think you'll see any outliers from us for sure.
Okay.
Well, when we report it, Mr. Chairman, any other working groups have any concerns, reach out to us. We'll be glad to address it.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. It's really good progress and great update. Okay, moving on to the last but not least working group, to the accelerating broadband deployment. I see, Jeff, your video's on, so I will turn it over to you for an update on progress there.
Thanks, Teddy. Yes, Heather is on the call, I think, as well, so I'll let her interject. But we sent in our addendum back. I was trying to see the date on it before, I think, the July 8th meeting, and we have not done much to add to that, because we felt like that was pretty well, we were on track with that. But if Heather's got something she would like to add to that, we'll let her do so at this time.
All I would add is I have on my to-do list to incorporate that addendum into our interim report and label it final and share it with you ahead of the next meeting, unless I am instructed or guided to do otherwise.
Great. Thank you, Heather. So it sounds like there weren't any major differences from the report that was sent last time, other than the addition of that addendum. So that's really good news as well. So that means we can start some of the merging of the document, major document, right, together. Again, when I say merging, I'm just talking about formatting, right? There's going to be an executive summary plus the 4 reports from the working groups, and really from a formatting perspective is to make sure that fonts look the same, sections are kind of consistent, and then also we make references and call outs to different parts that they all sort of tie in together. So that's really the work. So no major changes to the content. So as you work back with your working groups, again, all the work that's been done, it's going to be reflected at the end, and we just want to make sure that it's consistently appears the same, so it looks, kind of comes together, and also making sure that in the executive summaries things are kind of jiving. So So it sounds like overall from a task force perspective. Oh, sorry, was there a comment? Okay. And also, sorry, and before I get into, I got my head of myself and start talking about next steps, but any question from the rest of the task force to Jeff and Heather? Okay, I'm not really seeing any hands up, so I'm assuming we're good. So again, as you hear from all the working groups, it looks like everybody's in the final stages of the report, maybe a few updates here and there. What I will make sure is as the, we sent out some of the drafts from the data mapping as well as the connectivity needs. And I didn't get a chance to touch base with Jeff or Mike as far as being able to use the previous versions, but we'll make sure we kind of get that together. So we'll also send out the sort of similar format in a PDF, the draft versions of the other 2 working groups. So we'll have 4 reports that come through just for your reference, so you can, if you want to scan them over, you can. But in that, as soon as we get sort of all the last updates, like I said earlier, we'll start merging some of the document together. From a timeline perspective, I believe we have a meeting, and it is in September. I can quickly see here what day that is. It was September 14th, if I remember.
Hey, Teddy, yeah, that's correct, the 14th.
Yeah, September 14th, that's what was in my head. So the afternoon of September 14th is next time we're slated to meet. That will sort of be the official deadline for submitting the final drafts from the working groups. Sounds like we got a great head start ahead of that. And hopefully, if we get a little bit ahead of it, what we'll try to do is if there is a merged document that we can start to share, that may be what gets discussed at that meeting, knowing all the other pieces will be getting to final. So that's the next step really as the different chairs and all of you are part of a working group is to just march towards that September 14th date to have the final report. And then we'll get together in that meeting and review any kind of updates from sort of Delta from this meeting. We'll look through that and have a discussion if there's any required there. Again, you'll see an updated executive summary at that point in time as well. And then really the goal after September 14th is to really work on putting together like the document as I talked about, the executive summary, plus the 4 sections as they come from the different working groups. That work will be ongoing throughout the month of September. And we do have another meeting set up in October. And I believe that meeting is on, I should have had these handy. I had them written down and then I put it somewhere else. But
that one is also October 14th.
Is it the same date? Yeah. October 14th. Yep, there it is. On October 14th. And so at October 14th, at that point, we should have the final draft for our overall report over the last 2 years for this task force that will then be submitted to the FCC and the USDA. But the submission won't be on October 14th. October 14th is when the final draft will be ready. And then we do have a meeting in November. And what we'll do is between the October and November meeting, it will be the time to review the material so that when we get together in November, we will just pass the approval of the document. So the goal is to have that draft in your hands sooner than later so that we can go back and forth and have some healthy discussions about modifications that need to be made. But the good news is we've had several touch bases and we've been sharing documents. So obviously we may have some meaty conversation around 1 or 2 points, but for the most part, I think we're very much aligned on the recommendations we're putting forward. And then the sooner we can get it together, the sooner we can socialize with even members outside of this task force. So I think that's a little bit of an incentive for us to get this done a little bit faster. The other thing that's very exciting for me and is some of the recommendations we have are actually turning into reality a little bit. The different agencies are working together. The bill that got put together, there's a lot of the pieces that, we suggested are kind of included in that right now, not that it's passed yet, but that, the kind of having this and talking about it is helping. And I think that's exciting to see and really moving the mark. So that's really the expectations for next steps. Like I said, I think we're well positioned from a timeline perspective and we'll just continue to stay connected. And I think these smaller but more frequent meetings are really helpful. And one, giving us sort of a date to work to, and then two is giving us an opportunity to touch base and making sure we're all on the same page. So with that, I will open it to anybody else for any questions or comments on anything else. Chris McLean?
Yeah, I would just like to just thank everybody for all the hard work they put into not only today's meeting, but all of the work, and to validate what you had just said, that being able to sit in and hear these conversations have been very, very helpful, informative as we formulate our plans going forward. So I want to thank everybody for their participation.
Great. Thank you so much for the comment, and thank you for the support. I think the USDA has been a great partner in this all along the way. So, anything else from anyone else on the call? Well, I'm not seeing anything. So, you get to have 56 minutes back. That's the goal. That's the gift for the day. Big gift for me these days. All right. Well, thanks everyone. I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Have a great rest of the week, and we will talk in September.
Thank you very much.
Teddy.
Take care.
Thanks, Teddy.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thank you.